Okay, welcome everyone. We'll wait just a couple minutes for everyone to get settled, and I'm sure we'll have some more audience members trickle in. My name is Arik Burakovsky. I'm the Assistant Director of the Russia and Eurasia program here at Fletcher, and we're delighted today to have two distinguished guest speakers with us for what promises to be a very interesting conversation on regime stability and the dynamics of public opinion in Russia. I'm sure our guests don't need much of an introduction for our Russian-speaking part of the audience, but for the English speakers in the crowd, I'm pleased to welcome Ekaterina Schulmann and Maksim Kurnikov. Ekaterina Schulmann is a non-resident scholar at the Carnegie Russia-Eurasia Center in Berlin. She is a political scientist specializing in the decision-making and bureaucratic behavior of modern authoritarian regimes, with particular emphasis on Russia. She teaches political science as an associate professor at the Maksut Narikbayev Kazgulu University in Astana, Kazakhstan. And she is very popular on YouTube. She has a YouTube channel with over 1 million subscribers, and she has hosted Status, a popular weekly online program, since 2017, and she has a whole list of achievements. You can find her bio and that of Maksim on the event announcement. Maksim Kurnikov is a Russian journalist and media management head of the independent Echo Online Media and leading editor of Bild, the German media organization, and he worked for the Moscow-based independent radio station Echo Moskvy from 2008 to 2022. I'm also pleased to have my colleague, Professor Daniel Drezner, moderate the conversation. He is a distinguished professor of international politics and a non-resident senior fellow at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and he's a co-director of the Russia and Eurasia program here at Fletcher. His research focuses on international relations theory, economic statecraft, and he's a renowned expert on sanctions. We recently hosted a major conference here at Fletcher on economic warfare between Russia and the West. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Ekaterina and Maksim for their opening remarks. And after that, we will have a moderated conversation and a Q&A session with all of you. So Ekaterina, Maksim, welcome to Fletcher, and please.
Many thanks. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It's a real honor, and it's somewhat bewildering to be sitting beneath one's own portrait. When we were doing this photo session in Moscow, I think in 2022, little did we think that this little joke will be then publicized in one of the most prestigious universities of the New World. So, happy to be here. Thank you for coming. I'll try to make these introductory remarks as concise as possible so that we leave more time for the Q&A part, which is my favorite part in every sort of meeting. However, I would like to say a few words on the actual subject of this session. How can we assess the stability or the lack thereof, the general state of health of a country, of a political system that actively opposes being studied? That is closing up information, falsifying whatever data it does give out. That has managed to create a situation when a lot of people who studied it are no longer able to visit it if they are foreign experts, and those who were studying it from within have been obliged to leave the country. So you might have heard a lot of this in the public discourse. Things like, when you are no longer in Russia, you can never know what is actually happening there. You lose touch with the, I don't know, the breathing soul of your native land, so you can no longer understand what is actually happening. There's a lot of mystifying going on, in which discourse within which framework Russia is perceived as inherently unknowable. A mystery wrapped inside of an enigma, wrapped inside something else. You may complete this popular quote yourself. So I will start with acknowledging the difficulties. And then I will try to describe how we, people who still try to keep our professional assignments, how we manage to understand our favorite subject. So I was introduced to you in many flattering terms, including the number of subscribers on my YouTube channel, which I think has nothing to do with the subject in question. But actually, as a political scientist, I study legislative process, generally lawmaking and changing norms. Therefore, I need to understand bureaucracy and the way it works. Therefore, I need to generally have an idea of a decision-making process. I've been on the state service myself for some years in my younger days. I didn't reach any particular heights in my bureaucratic career, but still it gave me a kind of idea of how the machine works from the inside. And since then, I've been studying these normative changes for 2 decades, I think, at least. So even when war happened, even when I myself, as well as many of my academic colleagues, have been forced to flee the country, still I am more fortunate in that respect than many of my colleagues, because I study bureaucracy and bureaucracy leaves a paper trail. So these changes, which I follow, will be documented. I do miss a lot of data that was available to us in the times of transparency and modernization and digitalization and a little bit later. But so long as my electronic database, my favorite site in all internet, is open to me, even through the VPN, I'm able to carry on more or less the same thing I've been doing previously. In my specific field, I've not been dependent on the so-called insider sources. It's not that I didn't talk to people. I did talk to people. I would love to still have an opportunity to visit the State Duma that I've been going into again since 1999. But barring that happy chance, I still have more or less the same access to my actual material as I used to have. Of course, almost every month, we see that this or that governmental agency is closing down that information that used to be available to the public. We have, unfortunately, less and less information on such simple economic parameters like electricity consumption, for example, or Russian state railway company no longer publishes the amount of weight it's been carrying during a month or a year. That is no longer available. The federal budget itself is now about 28% secret. That means that we have only the broadest parameters, but not the budgetary articles themselves, and we cannot follow the movements of the budgetary funds within and between these articles. The Minister of the Interior is publishing less and less criminal statistics. Since the start of the war, they've tried to keep up the good work. But when the data went out about the sharp increase of crimes with the use of arms and explosives in every region of Russia, not just the frontline regions like Belgorod, but places like St. Petersburg, which is not getting bombed, not yet. And still the rise is spectacular. After media attention was attracted by that information, they have stopped publishing it. Even before the war, the general census of 2021 was, as considered by most of the demographic expert community, a disaster. It was a kind of hybrid event, combining online surveys with the old school door-to-door surveys, and both were not a success because people were not opening doors in the times of pandemic. It was 2021, and the online figures, Rosstat seems to have more or less created out of its own imagination. And of course, every region of the Russian Federation has an incentive to report higher population rates than it actually has, because budgetary funding goes per capita. So, again, before we start making assessments about various details of Russian state mechanisms, we have to kind of humbly affirm that we don't really know how many people live in Russia. Exact population data is either unavailable or unreliable. There is no statistics whatsoever coming out of the Northern Caucasian republics. I mean, there's a lot of statistics, but you cannot use it. It's even less real than whatever is coming from the other regions. Since 2022, Russia has been also extremely hazy as to its territory. So where are the borders? What are the territories? How many people live there? Does somebody live there at all? All these are important questions. And again, before we make conclusions of any sort, we have to understand what wobbly ground we actually stand on. However, now that I have painted to you the stark picture of the difficulties of studying an autocracy, I will add another one. Not only are the transparency levels going sharply down, we also have to deal with an informational autocracy that is routinely falsifying almost any information that it is giving out. The autocracies of the 21st century rely on propaganda, disinformation, make-believe, window dressing, lip service, imitation, even more than they rely on direct violence and repressions, although they make brilliant use of these old school instruments as well. But as the phrase goes, in the 20th century, dictatorships were 80% violence, 20% propaganda. In the 21st century, it's the other way around. So one trap that one has to be very careful not to fall into is swallowing the narrative that the generalized Kremlin is spreading about itself. This is crucial because it's not like all kinds of official statistics are unreliable, but you have to be very careful about the impression that you get. Because, again, these modern propaganda strategies, they are about direct lying, no doubt about that, but they are also about creating a kind of cloud that casts a shadow. Sorry for this vague and poetic metaphors, but I hope I'll make myself understood in a moment. You get an impression, for example, an impression that Russia is a country of limitless resources, human, financial, economic, that unlike Western democracies that are tied to electoral cycles, Russia has all the time at its disposal. It can continue its current policies as long as it takes, because, again, it's an inexhaustible well of all kinds of wealth, human and financial. As all effective propaganda, some of this picture is based on truth, but it is important to at least try to discriminate between what they want you to believe and what is actually true. This is a hard task, and I don't really have a set of rules like 12 easy steps to distinguish propaganda from information, but being aware is the first step to it. Coming to the question of how can we know something about the country when we are no longer living there? if the state, if a political regime is closing down, it is closing down equally to those inside the country and those outside of it. If some sort of data is no longer available, it is no longer available to me sitting here, and it's no longer available to my Romanian colleagues in Moscow. The difference is that I can try to form my own picture based on my own set of markers that I choose to follow and share my conclusions with somebody who can discuss it with me. And people in Russia cannot do it. So the romantic idea that you need to take a deep breath of native air and, I don't know, chew a handful of native soil in order to understand how Russia's heart is beating doesn't strike me as scientific. Again, I think it's more or less a fanciful distinction. Of course, it's nice to be able to actually live in the country, but it's nice to be able to live in the country when you have access to professional community, publicly available information, free discussion, that sort of thing. It's nice to go to the Duma, to return to my previous example, when you can have some sort of meaningful or at least informative discussion there. But if it's no longer the case, what's the point of being there except that you incur risks which will make you self-censor yourself before you are aware of it? So what I mentioned a set of markers that we are following. If we don't have, again, direct and reliable and available information, what do we do? I mentioned the paper trail. If you know how to read the bureaucratic lingo, you can get a kind of understanding of the way things are moving, even from the seemingly meaningless torrent of official paperwork. That takes it takes a certain time to learn the trade, but once you do it, you understand it. And then you can get your information from various sources. For example, there are still publications, magazines published by various ministries, like one of my favorite is published by the Ministry of Defense, and it's called the Military Commissariats of Russia. It's a monthly magazine, a real page turner, a thriller. When you drag yourself through its engrossing pages, you get to understand, for example, how are things standing with the electronic registry of the military personnel? Is it going to be operative anytime soon? Which department and which ministry is blaming which other ministry for the delay? They don't exactly say so in direct words, but from the way, for example, deputy head of the general headquarters speaks about it in an interview, you can make what I think is called an educated guess. So, bureaucratic information is still out there if you know how to read it. If we cannot rely on polling and sociological data when it concerns direct political questions, the answers to which are not very informative in the situation of military censorship and repressions, we still have other kinds of surveys, polls, and studies. For example, if you can't ask the people about their attitude towards the special military operation, well, you can, but again, the answers are not very educational. You can ask them about their consumer optimism, about what they think, how their family's financial situation will develop in 6 months or in a year. Do they think it will get better or worse or remain the same? Do they think the country is moving in the right direction? There are numerous surveys based on values, what I would call a values surveys. One of my favorite sources is the Institute of Sociology of the Russian Academy of Science. They publish very interesting things. Again, they avoid direct political discussions, but they ask the respondents what values Russia's future should be based on. And when you read the long line of answers for 20 years, not that I've been reading it for 20 years, they've been doing it for 20 years, then these dynamics show you something, at least some sort of direction. One of my favorite polls is the one published weekly by Public Opinion Foundation, and that is the famous anxiety rating. The question goes, what is the mood of the people around you? Are they more calm or are they more anxious? So the fluctuations of these two lines speak volumes. By connecting these fluctuations with the events, either on the front line or inside the country, you may try to understand what is worrying the Russian people, what they care about, and what kind of news they actually miss. That is, I think, informative. The question with the polls, and that's the last thing I will say in my part, in my part of the lecture. When you try to collect and analyze this varying information, and you try to form from those pieces of puzzle a kind of coherent picture of the general state of the public mind, the question goes, why is it important? Why does it matter? If we are dealing with an autocratic government, why does it matter what people are thinking if they can't influence political decisions? They're not voters. They're not the electorate. They're not even citizens in the proper sense of the word. So if they are unhappy or anxious or would like the special military operation to stop on any terms, and this is the kind of data that we get from the latest polls, including those done by the independent sociological services like the Chronicles or the Russian Field, why does it matter at all? If there is, again, no connection between what the people want and what the authorities do. The answer is, again, and that's the true expert answer, it matters and it does not. It does not directly affect the decisions taken by the leadership, but this general state of the public mind affects also Russia's wide and numerous bureaucracy, which is part of the society. Russia is a highly bureaucratic political regime. We are a personalized autocracy with a very prominent bureaucratic component. Also, the mood of the people and the mood of the elites are, of course, two different things, but they are not they are not strictly divided from each other. We can know that if from nothing else, from the fact of Kremlin's obsession with polling and with polling results. They've been doing their own surveys for years. These have been called the secret polls of the FSO. Literally, it is the Federal Bodyguard Service. Why are they doing polls is another question. I can answer it, but it's complicated. A lot of administrative details here. But since, I think, 2016, the advent of the new deputy head of presidential administration and the general changes in the political bloc of the presidential administration, this has reached whole new magnitude. Polling is going on every day. I have an impression that every Russian is being asked his or her opinion on various matters every week, either by phone polls or by direct questionnaires in the working places or in the universities. There are questionnaires for teachers, for students. Filling them up is supposed to be obligatory. They're supposed to be anonymous. But I can understand that somebody, and I think that somebody is the political bloc of the presidential administration, is amassing an enormous amount of data. I don't know if they have either the brain or the capacity to actually understand the material they're getting, but they're getting really a lot of it. I am being sent samples in great quantities. People think that it's a good thing, and it is a good thing to send me an example. And it's informative even to follow the changes in these questions. So sometimes, well, there's the general part. Well, are you happy? Do you love the president as he deserves to be loved? That's the obligatory part. But there's also the changeable part, and I think it kind of reflects the things that Kremlin wants to know about. When there was trouble with Prigozhin, there were a lot of questions about Prigozhin. Then there were questions about Kursk. Then there were questions about, do you think it likely that economically based protests will happen in the place where you live. The latest wave it surprised me because it asked the question, do you think that a riot is likely in the place where you live? The exact Russian word was mятеж, which is rather exotic. Usually they say something like protest or unrest or массовые беспорядки, but here it was just riot. Maybe it's connected to the latest changes in the criminal code that is passing through the Duma. Again, I sorry for being so detailed, but that's my pet subject. So the obsession with this polling data, with this polling information, is understandable. If you can't afford the risks of real elections, but you still need to know what your people are thinking, you kind of invent feedback channels in place of those you have broken up. So again, if you can't have real elections, you will be anxiously watching the fluctuations of those various sociological parameters. The cult of the presidential rating, that has been one of the staples of Kremlin informational policy for years, is one of the signs of this worldview. So, public opinion does not exist in a country without a free public sphere. But what people think and how they feel still matters. No autocrat rules alone, or with the help of his 5 friends. So if it's worth their while to follow the dynamics of public opinion, then I think it's worth our while as well. On this, I will conclude my introductory part. And yeah, if you'd like to say, do that something.
I think I have not a lot to add, because you said mostly I agree. I just add something. I think I will add that we should remember that we have, I think, the first time in the world's history when not just a media or not just 5 media, a newspaper or something, but the media system went out of the country and still working for those who are inside of the country. If we try to count all media and YouTube channels and others who are working now from abroad to the audience inside of Russia, we shall count from 60 to 100 different media and YouTube channels. And that's, they are big. And that, I think, changes our usual model of thinking about the closing country. Because yes, it's trying to be closed, but still we have a lot of sources of information, and more of that, we have a big media influence inside of the country. More of that, if we will talk about the sources and even journalism of sources, which I do not like, to tell the truth, but still a lot of sources inside of Russia who are working in, I don't know, from State Duma to prosecutor office are still quite open if they anonymous. To tell the truth, it was very interesting period in this summer when I had some tours in different countries where a lot of Russian businessmen of high level was living in their summer, and I met with them in different countries, and I should say that they're not just full of information. They just really want to talk about it, I don't know, for hours and hours. I think that's something they really think will help them, even with I don't know, with themselves. They want to give this information to us. So I think yes, it's closing country, but still we have more sources than if we compare with Soviet Union, for example. We have more sources if we compare with Iran. We have more sources if we compare with I don't know, Northern Korea.
Belarus.
And Belarus too, yeah. So I think that we, of course, should say thanks to social media too. Just they appeared before Russian became so autocracy than it was. So more of that, I should say that this media system, which is helping to be a bridge between those who are inside and who are outside, and to influence to each other. I think that these talks about who are inside and who are outside, how they different, how they have different pictures of what's going on in Russia, I think it's more or less not true, or maybe dramatized, because I think that I agree with Ekaterina Schulmann that, of course, if you just look when something goes wrong in Russia, you will see that media who situated outside of Russia, sometimes faster than media inside Russia. When it was Prigozhin's riot, mostly those media who were outside of Russia, they were faster in a lot of news. So I think that still we have a lot of opportunities, but of course trends are not good. And of course we have some problems with getting information when we need something, not even officially, but with the name. If we are calling someone and they understand that they are talking with the media, which is situated out of Russia, even if they not work in the system, inside of the system, they're afraid to talk. They're afraid to give comments if you will say our conversation is recording or something like that. They would never talk in, I don't know, in 90% of cases. So of course we have problems, but still it's not so closed as we were afraid.
What have been worse?
Yes.
Give me that. Yeah. Thank you very much. Actually, first of all, a round of applause. That was so I believe my role is to start by asking a few questions and then to open it to the audience. So I will ask you all to start thinking of some good questions to ask. But one of the perks of being a moderator is I get to ask the obvious questions. So let me start with that, which is the first thing that struck me upon what you were saying is that obviously Russia doesn't want either its citizens or the rest of the world to get access to information that could be seen as not just embarrassing, but also strategically valuable to countries that would potentially, use it or exploit it to counter Russian interests. At the same time, you pointed out that the Kremlin is obviously obsessed with polling its citizens and, knowing exactly what the state of the mood of the country is. I guess my question is, to what extent is the Kremlin itself handicapped by the sort of, increasingly repressive measures that it's taken? In other words, I have no doubt the Kremlin wants to poll Russians to find out what's going on. But just as we would be suspicious of how Russians would respond to external polls, shouldn't we obviously be suspicious of how they would respond to Kremlin-sponsored polls? And doesn't that create a danger for the Kremlin, which is they might think they're gathering data, but as the quality of the Kremlin's data decline, just as the transparency of the data has also declined?
That's a very good question. it's a curse of autocracies generally to be obliged to make decisions based on insufficient or just false information, because they form information bubbles. They reward loyalty rather than effectiveness. They want to get the good news, and no one wants to bring the bad news to the boss, because you get rewarded for if he hears from you what he wants to hear. The example of this that is before our eyes forever is the beginning of this war. It was evidently started on completely false premises, on the information that was submitted by the Fifth Department of the FSB and by the Russia-oriented political forces in Ukraine who were acting in their own interest. And they were feeding the leadership, the world picture that fortunately coincided with the world picture already inside the aging brains, and hence the result. So yes, of course, Russians are generally not enthusiastic about talking to the pollsters at all. Response rate has never been high. It's not high worldwide. People don't enjoy talking about unrelated matters for free with strangers. But with the start of the war, response rate has dropped from the customary 20% to less than 10%. And that, of course, applies to every kind of polling, including what you call the Kremlin-sponsored one. I don't know what the Kremlin is doing. I have mentioned that I don't really know how they analyze all these mountains of data that they are amassing, but what I do, I can tell you what I do. We cannot afford to sweep aside any data because it's been submitted by FCIOM, which is a state-owned sociological service, or to use only Levada because it's a foreign agent, or to say polls don't matter because people lie. Again, we cannot afford either this, or we cannot afford the luxury of basing our conclusions on any single parameter. I'll take this trend, I'll follow it, and that will be my guide. We have to, again, feel our elephant now in a dark room by his various parts. We try to combine the information to form something. Maybe we are connecting the wrong dots. In this, we are in the same, well, not exactly in the same kind of predicament as autocratic leadership, because we have more access to the free world of information and discussion. And if we are talking nonsense, some people will probably point this out to us, unlike within an autocratic system where such a thing is impossible. But again, what conclusions they're drawing, I don't know. I can guess what they want to understand from the trend of these questions. One can more or less guess what they perceive as threats. And again, we are not just dealing with a country at war that is closing information against its enemies. We are dealing with an informational autocracy run by secret police people. They are physically unable to speak the truth, even when it's to their advantage. And they think the world is run on the same lines. So they perceive the universe as a system of threats and challenges directed at them, which they have to avoid. So disinformation is what they produce and what they consume. It's a precarious balance, whether they're deceiving the world more or they're deceiving themselves more. If you are a resource-rich autocracy with a solidified repressive apparatus, you can afford to make decisions based on false grounds because you have people and money to compensate for your initial stupidity. Hence, if you've gotten yourself into a war which turned out to be nothing like you planned it to be, you can still go on with it because you have the people and the money. Not an inexhaustible resource as you want to. You want it to appear, but still something. So the answer to your question would be yes, they live in a bubble. Yes, they are surrounded by yes men who only tell what is expected of them. The general rule used by our leadership for years was that if you compare reports from different secret services, you get a kind of objective picture. These secret services can combine between themselves to paint your objective picture for you. And generally, comparing opposing reports does not present you with the truth. So if one agency is writing against another agency and the other way around, by putting those together, you don't get to the objective picture. But that's the way they used to work, and you can teach an old dog new tricks, not very old dog.
About new tricks and old dogs. Just if we try to remember how Soviet Union was working and how they worked with the information, many people thought that, of course, what they broadcast, what they say publicly is, of course, not true. But inside of the system, there is an information which is, reliable and so on. But no, we know that it was not like this. We were talking with Mikhail Gorbachev and asking him about what did he do about Chernobyl when it happened. And he said that the only thing I knew was KGB and Western media. And of course, I couldn't believe Western media at the moment because I saw what I saw in the papers. And when I understood that they were lying to me was quite late. So I think the situation didn't change a lot. But that's the first thing. The second thing, we should understand that people working in the system, in different parts, in army and in civil service, I think that the middle part of the chain, of course, do not believe the information they hear from the downside and from upside. I think that they, as far as I understand the situation, nobody believes nobody. Nobody believes in the official propaganda and so on. And if we will try to look what is the main point of so-called Z propaganda when something happens, the main motto, the main phrase is, we should stop to lie. So everybody understands that everyone lies. And when something happens, they don't know what to do. They say, we should to stop lying. It's sometimes funny. And more of that, if you will try to understand how propaganda works, for example, for officers in Russian army, you will see that the most of these messages to them starts with American Institute of something said that they have top 5 of armies in the world, The first is American, the second is Russian, the 5th is Ukrainian, something like that. Or Bloomberg said that there are more than 200 conflicts in the world, but you see that Western media are talking only about Ukrainian, that's something, not correct, and so on. It means they all message they want Russian officers to believe. They start with Americans said, or independent Western media said. They understand that the middle part of the chain do not believe what they say from themselves. And I think it shows the situation with the information they have and they trust.
So I'm only going to ask 2 more questions. So again, I'm going to encourage you to all start formulating your own. One I have, I guess, is, Ekaterina, you talk about how you can develop alternative markers, that you can, admittedly, the quality of the Russian data is censored and often, if it's reliable, it's about very arcane things, but you're able to take that data and convert it into something useful. As a political scientist, that's great, but obviously I need to see what your methodology is, and I need to see your data in order to believe it. And it strikes me that there's a danger with that from you, because every time you demonstrate how you can take previously useless data and make it useful, I'm not the only one reading you. Obviously, the Kremlin is also reading you. And so, have you ever had a situation where you're reporting on information, you're saying, look, we know we can draw this conclusion, and then suddenly the raw data that you were relying on becomes no longer available? In other words, what's the trade-off between producing useful analysis, but also producing transparent analysis?
So you pose before me a moral dilemma. I use a source and I compromise it. Well, I think the real danger.
No, I'm asking. I could be
Yeah.
wrong about this,
Yeah.
so please correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay. Yes, I see your point, but I think there's more danger of me overestimating my own importance in the eyes of the Kremlin, thinking then whatever I mention gets immediately, transported to Kirienko or to whomever, and they think, oh, Schulman is quoting this, we need to close that down. I'm not responsible for their actions. They're responsible for theirs, and I'm responsible for mine. I did kind of get the impression that once this criminal data that I cited coming from the Minister of the Interior became widely quoted, not just by unique and special me, but by many other analysts and many other media sources, they did close it down. So, should I stop praising the Duma electronic database that I use on a daily basis for fear that it will be closed down? By the way, I did a different thing with the help of some IT volunteers. There has been created an alternative database that is both connected to this Duma site and independent from it. We did it in the expectation, and not unreasonable expectation, that they will not just block access to this database from foreign IPs. They've already done that, but I know how to use VPN, but they will close it altogether. Even in this case, if it becomes only approachable from inside the parliament, we'll still get the access. So this is the kind of precautions I think could be rationally taken. But if we start imagining the reaction of the imaginary Kremlin to everything we say and do, then we'll come to the same state of self-censorship as people inside Russia, and we don't want to do that.
Maksim, I guess I'll ask you the same question, but not so much for data, but for sources and so forth.
I should say that here for last 2 days, when we were traveling from New York to Chicago and then from Chicago to Boston, we received, I think Ekaterina Schulmann received and I received a lot of information before we came. For example, through Instagram, through Telegram, and through other sources, people are sending what they facing inside of Russia. For example, advertising for going to the army, and it's interesting, in regions very far from Moscow, there are telephones of Moscow services hiring people. Or, for example, we received photos from lessons in schools of Russia of special, I don't know how to say it in English, but the special lessons of, let's say, politology.
You mean разговоры о важном?
No, it's something, yeah.
Снова российской государственности?
No. So
Russian state.
Basic
That's
government.
yeah. So it's politologists from different universities are coming to school. It's and showing what is freedom, and they say that now is freedom in Russia because it is It was a period of, consumerism. And of course, before that, in 90s and zeros, and when you are a fan of consumerism, you are not free. It's something like that. Свобода лучше, чем не свобода, да? So, for example, then I received from, I can say, Yekaterinburg University, a conspects of lectures which are reading right now there. So, a lot of people are sending, and of course, they want to be anonymous. So they don't want us to claim their names, to claim the source, or sometimes even to claim the region. But I think we have this balance between sources, us, and audience, because everybody understands the situation. And of course, in these cases, the price of trust is higher than usual, because we cannot name the sources, but still we want to share this information.
So, unfortunately, Russia is hardly the only state that is reducing its data transparency, that is, engaging in massive amounts of censorship, that is issuing tremendous amounts of propaganda. I guess my question is, to what extent have you learned or shared best practices with academics and journalists who are focusing on China, on Belarus, on other countries that, are basically engaging in similar practices? And indeed, unfortunately, the Kremlin is likely learning from China in terms of how it's supposed to be doing things. So to what extent do you feel like you're only, like, you're just concerned about Russia and you don't, there's no point in learning about how others are doing it? Or are you actually, able to share best practices and tips with others?
That's, again, a very good question. And it's a very good subject that we should be paying more attention to, because we Russians tend to be very Russia-centric. We think our country is the only country in the world that matters, or that is of any interest to any human being.
Americans do not have this problem at all.
No, of course not. Yes, maybe it's the curse of these big continental powers. So we should be doing this much, much more, because as a political scientist, well, every political scientist knows that autocracies, again, to quote Tolstoy, all democracies are unhappy in their own way, but every autocracy is miserable alike.
It was Chekhov.
It was Tolstoy's the first phrase in Anna Karenina, the opening sentence. So the practices of autocratic regimes across the world are shockingly similar. We call it in our science, we call it authoritarian learning. A good example is foreign agent legislation, which Russians claim have originated in the United States, the FARA law of 1938, missing the point of its having been changed heavily in the 60s. But if Americans do it, then of course we have to do it 3 times over, because we are so anti-American. So these laws have been creeping across the globe by a process that is virtually a copy-paste. Informational policies, general distrust of international NGOs and any international nets and connections, and the desire to break up those nets are highly similar across the authoritarian universe. We are, of course, more closely connected to our Belarusian colleagues. In terms of political development, Belarusian dictatorship has usually been about a year and a half to 2 years in advance of us. So whenever any kind of practice is appearing in Belarus, we should be aware that it's likely to appear in about 2 years in Russia as well. Being forced to get out of your own country and your own nice information bubble, I hope has cured at least some of us, at least of some portion of our native provincialism. For example, I have not been aware how similar is the situation in Iran and what similar challenges Iranian diaspora is facing. So I very much wish to know more about the work they do, how they organize themselves, what activities they produce, how they communicate with those inside their country. Because again, the similarities are striking. When one meets educated Iranians in Europe, it's like meeting a long lost relative. We are talking about exact same thing. We both have a crazy aging leadership that used to be popular a while ago, but now is no longer so, but is using repression, disinformation, and the besieged fortress mentality in order to stay in power for whatever time they still have left. And we have educated and intelligent people forced to leave their country and now working elsewhere, but still trying to somehow make things better for their native land at long distance. So again, autocracies learn from each other. We should be learning from each other as well. We are, again, we've been doing this with Belarus. We should be doing this more with countries like Iran. I don't know that much about China. Comrade Gabuyev knows all that there is to know. China, although it is evidently very much not so much a model as an ideal to our current leadership, is a unique system in many ways. It's a party autocracy. We are not. Well, it's changing its rules, maybe moving to a more personalized model. I don't know how that will play out, but socially and economically, and in terms of mechanisms of elite renewal and career lifts and bureaucratic structures, China has been and remains very different. And their internet sphere, for example, has been constructed on a different basis from the Russian one, because Chinese internet has been developed under the close surveillance of the party, but Russian internet has been growing in comparative freedom, well, in quite real freedom, till I think 2019, maybe. It was no earlier than that the state began paying real attention to the internet as such, not just, introducing its own media into the internet sphere, but trying to meddle with the skeleton of the web in order to control it more, to block it, to censor it, etc. So I don't know, again, I don't know how much we can learn from China and the Chinese pro-democracy diaspora, but from those other countries I have mentioned, we can really learn a lot.
I think that I'm more practical in this than theoretical, and here is Vasily Gatov. I think he will tell more. He can say more about that. But I was talking a lot and consulting a lot with our colleagues from China, from Iran, from Belarus. Thanks God, we are living in Berlin. And Berlin is a point of different dissidents and journalists who came from different countries, and even, I don't know, from Afghanistan and so on. So we had a lot of contacts for these 2.5 years. And of course, we sharing practices, and we are talking, and we are trying to do something together sometimes. And if we compare the situation in Russia with media, I think that we can put countries in two big groups, where the situation with freedom of speech is getting in the country from better to worse, or from worse situation to little better, or the same level. Why it is important? If we talking about the development of different media last 30 years, it is extremely important what was the regime 30 years ago, because internet as a mass media platform appeared approximately 30 years ago, and social media appeared in this period. What does it mean practically? It means that if internet started in this country as a real free model, it is very hard to authorities, to regime, to win it. This situation we see in Russia, in Turkey, and a little in Belarus. If we are talking about China, we should understand that internet from the very beginning in this country, in countries like this, were built in as a very closed system, and it's much harder there to talk with the huge audience if you're independent from the authorities. When we were talking about YouTube channels and different types of media with our Chinese colleagues, they were shocked how many subscribers Russian popular YouTube channels have. If we compare the number of people living in China and their independent media and the number of people living in Russia and Russian-speaking independent media, it's uncomparable. Russian media have much bigger audience in comparison. What does it mean else? In Russia and in Turkey, the biggest operator, the biggest broadcaster of Russian propaganda is Google. And in Turkey, the biggest operator and broadcaster of Turkish propaganda, I mean propaganda not of the, I mean of Erdogan, yeah, is Google. Google News, Google Discovery, and other programs which made by them, showing to people purely information made by state propaganda services. It means that we still have some opportunities we didn't use if big tech will play with us in our side, or not play on the other side, just be neutral or something like that. And we still have big audiences, and we still have media in exile which have huge audience inside of the country and working more or less legally. More of that, if we are talking about Turkey and if we are talking about Russia, we should remember that they are going, as I said, from better situation to worse situation. It means the regime needs to fight against freedom of speech. And if we will look at Russian situation, freedom of speech and independent media were appearing even before Russia began. They were appearing in 80s. It means when Soviet Union was crushed and Russia appeared, the independent media working on this territory were before Russian authorities claimed as Russian authorities of a new Russia. And they really became strong institutions in 90s and the beginning of zeros, the institutions which Vladimir Putin tried to fight from the very beginning. And he fought with them all his years of his presidential terms, and he was fighting with them. He was fighting with them until 2022, and then he closed them, breaking his own laws, even his own rules. It means he couldn't win. And more of that, when these media were closed inside of Russia, they are still working. The same thing is with NGOs which are working with human rights. And if you just remember last 3 years of Nobel Prizes, you will see that there are Russian NGO and Russian media, because they really still working in its very hard situation. So of course we have a lot of in common, Of course, we are trying to work together. Especially, we are trying to work with big tech, because I think it is one of the keys with working as with societies as Russian and Turkish.
Okay, I said I was only going to ask 2 questions. I asked 2 questions, and now is the time when I can take questions from the audience. So if you have one, please raise your hand. I will call on you. And then when I call on you, do please identify yourself. Red jacket.
Hello, my name is Olga. And first I want to say thank you for Ekaterina Mikhailovna, because your job is incredible. It saved my mental health, specifically for several weeks after it was started. And my question is about public opinions. As you said, it's really hard to distinguish the percent of people who support, the percent of people who are in position in the country, but we still know that there are 2 bubbles, and basically one bubble is support Putin and his regime, and another is in opposition and support democracy. And my question is it possible to do anything from our side to fuse these bubbles? Or is it possible theoretically? Is it natural? Will they fuse itself during the time? And or is our new world and we will live like that, cannot speak with our relatives, and we'll have these 2 bubbles forever? So that's my question.
So you think that merging these 2 bubbles will produce an explosion, which is possible, yeah, not impossible at least. First, I don't exactly see the picture as you describe it. If we look at the polls asking questions about support for the special military operation, we see not 2 groups, I wouldn't call them bubbles, but rather, how many? Oh,
7.
who will say more? Okay, putting it very roughly, we have 3 groups. The one that in the terms of sociological service, the Chronicles, is called pro-war. That is people who, at the same time, support the special military operation, will not support peace agreement without reaching its stated goals, and think that military spending ought to be a priority rather than social spending. This is a pro-war group. It is around 17 to 18% of respondents. It varies month in, month out, but it is not growing. The second is an anti-war, or rather pro-peace bubble. This is people who don't like the special military operation, generally would support peace agreement right now without achieving the stated goals, and think that social spending ought to be prioritized. These 2 groups are comparable. The second is also about 20%. And it is not growing either. All in between are the opportunists. People who think that whatever decision, or who say that whatever decision will be taken by the president will be supported by them. So if he signs a peace agreement, well and good. If he decides to march onto Kiev and you, then he knows best. This is the largest group. And if the first and the second are not growing, and I think they are rather diminishing if we take 2024, then this middle group is either stable or enlarging. So this is what autocracy does to its citizens. It does not make them into bloodthirsty war maniacs. It makes them into opportunists and conformists. And the longer this whole thing goes, the more people would either refuse to state an opinion or would actually say that they would like this whole thing to stop. Again, if we look at the latest results, summer, autumn months of the current year, if we look at the Chronicles and the Russian field, we get a kind of paradoxical picture when support rates for the special military operation are high. Positive answer to the question, do you think the war is going well for Russia, are also high, but we also get an all-time record of the percentage of respondents who would support the end of the operation immediately. Again, I repeat this formula because it's important. Without achieving the stated goals of the special military operation. So it sums up like this. We like it very much. It's going brilliantly for us. It needs to stop immediately. That sounds like a paradox, but if you understand how autocracies are working and what are they doing to the societies they exploit, then it is no longer a paradox. To support this whole thing is a socially approved choice. It's the only safe answer. We ought rather be surprised that we still have about 20% of people who say they don't support it. But it's going on month in, month out. The results are hard to understand for an average Russian. They have been used for years to delegate all responsibility, especially for foreign policy, security, and military, to the president because he knows best. They think he started the war for reasons best known for himself, and they support him because this is the thing you do. But now it is also up to him to end the whole thing because he knows how, undoubtedly. This, again, position may strike one as rather childish and irresponsible, but if you are not a citizen, if you don't have agency, this is about the only viable position you may occupy. So, trying to break anybody's bubble is a noble work, but you should not expect to achieve too much. People generally know what is happening, or they know where to get information. The most widespread kind of answer you'll get to your attempts to open the eyes of somebody to the horrible truth will be this. Okay, I know what is happening, so what? What do I do next with this precious knowledge of mine? Can I convert it to, well, people don't say this, that's me speaking as a political scientist, can I convert it to political action? No, I cannot. Can I influence the outcome or the process? No, I cannot. So what's the point of knowing the so-called truth? That's not a pleasant kind of thing to either hear or say, but this is the reality of, again, any given autocracy.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm David. You mentioned which is the new subject in Russian school curriculum. Do you think, will the Ministry of Education try to get the total control over the educational system so there will be no more schools or universities, for instance, the school I went to, School 57, that doesn't follow the agenda, the curriculum? And you also mentioned that teachers are being pulled, and is there any change in that data that you're aware of?
So you are from the 57. You privileged Moscovitz. All right. So attempts to instill some sort of ideological indoctrination in not just higher education, but secondary education as well. And now the president has signaled that we can have those talks about important things even in kindergartens is evident. The problem is that there is no ideology to install. There is a kind of collection of memes and catchphrases teaching general loyalty to the authorities, whatever these authorities be. And also the second idea is that military is a good thing. The third idea, I think, yeah, 3 ideas is quite enough for anyone, is that the outside world is generally hostile to Russia. So you get this world picture from for example, the new textbooks on contemporary Russian history, co-authored by Vladimir Medinsky, or from the textbooks for universities on the basics of Russian statehood, already mentioned. And there are two types, one for the humanitarian universities and another for the for those studying technical or natural sciences. I've flipped through both of them. By the way, the basics of Russian statehood is not horrible. It's horrible, but not too horrible. It could be worse. The list of sources is actually quite nice. It has some foreign authors on it, and it has Golosev's book, which is surprising. Yeah, exactly. So maybe they'll change that during the next editions, but so far it's not too horrible. But if you read for example, history textbooks, you get this idea that Russia is forever opposed to the perfidious West. West is forever attacking Russia because our values are different. It will never stop attacking because values are different. And Russia will never be defeated by the West because the values are different. But no side can win. And this existential battle is going on forever, which, when you come to think of it, is not a very inspiring ideology to convert young people to. For example, this communist ideology had a nice and clear picture of the future. You know, political economic forms are changing because Marx told them so.
And it was a teleological story.
Of course, exactly. So there's primitive societies, there's the ancient world, there's feudalism, capitalism, imperialism, its highest point, then socialism, and then communism. Or if you come to the fascist ideology, there was also the end of the story when the Aryan race will inhabit the earth as it deserves to. So if you fight the battle on the right side, you will live to see the bright future. But this Russia versus West thing is more like something in heathen Scandinavian mythology, when you have this internal battle going on forever with no perceptible result, and then there will be Ragnarok and the gods will die. So what's the attraction? What's the incentive of this whole thing? But I can perceive how, if we speak about changes in the educational sphere, having got rid of the constraints of Bologna system, Russian authorities are planning to shorten the term of, at least they're saying it, to shorten the number of years that Russians are studying. So the above mentioned Vladimir Medinsky said that 11 years of schooling is too much. The weird thing he said was, it's like we're living in the 19th century. Although, of course, the historical reality is the other way around. The more developed the country, the longer the years of schooling. And he added 5 or 6 years of higher education is also too much. I can perceive that almost 3 years into the war, while the system has not been able to develop any coherent ideology, it has come to at least desire a very practical and concrete goal: to make young Russians into cheaper soldiers quickly. Now it is paying for their cannon fodder the ever-increasing price. And they're always complaining about the consumerism that has taken hold of the younger generation. The younger generation is being cursed publicly all the time because they've all been spoiled by the liberals, they've been breastfed by Soros himself, and so they are no good patriots. We can't do anything with them. But what I think they want to do is to get hold, if they have enough time, of this generation of relatively high birth rates that happened in Russia between 2006 and 2016. The so-called maternity capital children of comparative prosperity and stability, and teach them to sell themselves for less. So if they need more soldiers when these people are 18 and over, it will not cost them so much. That's not ideology. That's not the grand picture of the future of humanity. But again, it's a very tangible goal. If only they live long enough, they have time enough, like 10 years, in order to carry this plan into effect.
Red shirt, turtleneck.
Hi, I'm Marcus Vahed from Harvard University, and I research anti-war resistance in Russia and Belarus. So the question I want to ask you is, how reliable are the resistance media and social media channels that we see? I'm thinking here both of such anti-war anarchist groups that deal with throwing, Molotov cocktails at bankomate, but also let's say FPK, right, which is both a political movement and also presents itself as some sort of investigative journalism. So how reliable is the opposition media?
What do you mean by reliable? What kind of reliability are you searching for?
Or when they...
In terms of the facts that they publish?
That, but also when they claim, for example, responsibility for derailing trains, there's no way to say they actually did it, right?
Huh. I think it's more your thing.
Okay, so there are very different anti-war groups inside of Russia and out of Russia. I should say that many of them connected to different platforms. Some of these platforms connect more than 100 different small organizations all over the Russia. And I should say for us as a media, it is always very hard to decide how to work with them in different parts of this, because can they do something, but when they claiming about it, try to show that they made more than they really made. Yes, of course. How we should work with that, yeah? How we can check it, that's a problem. But there is another moral problem. When they do something inside of Russia, we know they made it, they wrote about it, or they wrote us about it, and how to speak about that. If we said they did it, it looks like we telling Russian authorities, hey, look, you have someone on your territory who've done it. And that's why we are trying to write about this, not claiming them, not naming them. And it was, for me, a big surprise when we met with them in one of the countries, and they said, hey, why don't you name us? I said, because you are inside of Russia, it's impossible to name you because Russian authorities will react. And they said, hey, you should not think for us in this question. We made it. We wrote you about that. And we want to be named because that's something we want to make publicly. As it was said here, I was asking my colleagues from other countries, how do they work with that? And I was surprised that in Iran and Afghanistan, they have the same problem. For example, girls, young women in Afghanistan who wanted to go to universities, they decided to make a protest event, and they made it and opened their face. And when colleagues from Iran and Afghanistan who working in Europe published it, they pixeled their faces, so they blurred their faces. And these activists were protesting for that. They said Taliban is changing our covering our faces. Why do you that? We made this action because we wanted to be visible. Why do you? So to tell the truth, we are trying to find the ways working with it and checking the reliable this information or not. And more of that, if it is reliable, how we should talk about that, because it could be, the situation from both sides. So, of course, we should not trust everything they say because they just anti-war organizations. But if you are talking about Russian independent media, I should say that most of them has a big tradition behind them and professional tradition behind them. And more of that, they are trying to live in the world they came. I mean, European and American. I don't know where most of them are situated right now. I think more in Europe. And of course, they are trying to make their policy, editorial policy, and they try to publish it and make it clear to everyone. So most of Russian independent media, I should say, we trust. Those 70 I mentioned in the very beginning.
Okay, we are, I've been told that we can go a little bit over time, and what I'm going to do is collect 3 questions, and I see 3 hands, so that's good, and then we will leave it back to Ekaterina and Maksim, and then we will close out. So first, you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Arthur. I'm a theoretical physicist, originally from Kazan. A question about the dynamics of public opinion. In the dynamics of public opinion, whether through responses to the indirect questions of sociological polls that you've mentioned, or the changes in the rate of participation, can you pinpoint qualitatively different stages in the dynamics since February 22, and through that infer qualitatively different stages of the war or the process of closing down of the country, and perhaps cautiously looking forward, say something about the stage to come?
Okay, don't answer that. Right here. Yes, you.
Hello, my name is Elizaveta. Thank you so much for your lecture. And as Maksim mentioned, that Google now is being the biggest platform for broadcasting propaganda, and also in Russia. And also, I remember that government now has a budget spending on propaganda much higher than last year. So why is it happening? Why the contradiction that now Russia is planning to close the Google, so they're pointing that they want to cut the ties with them, but in the same time, they want the propaganda to be efficient, and they spending money on that. So why they closing the source in the same time they want to increase the efficiency of the propaganda?
Okay, and there was one hand back there. Yep, go.
Alex. I'm a master's student here at Fletcher. I'm actually from China, and then as we're talking about, also there's some parallels about studying the public opinion in Russia and China. So I was previously studying Chinese public opinion on the foreign policy making during the pandemic. So we found 2 really interesting things in our research methodology. The first one is, of course, a selection bias, right? Like survivor's bias, like who you talk to. Like the people that we talk to, sometimes you can see a pattern of the fact that they're able to talk to us already imply something about the type of answer that we'll give. And then there's a second interesting thing that we noticed, which I want to ask you about it, is we figure out a pattern of non-response as well. So in a set of questions, sometimes people choose not to answer. They would just say, oh, I do not wish to answer this question. And then you can make assumptions about this fact, right? They would, for example, I guess in the Russian public opinion cases, because there's this type of censorship, they are afraid of retributions. But in our case, we also found that sometimes non-responding can be resulted from the fact that, why are you studying us? Go away. I don't want to answer this. I don't want to give you this because.
And what kind of questions prompt the breakup of the interview? When do Chinese respondents, when are they more likely to drop out of the conversation? What questions scare them, to put it in simple terms?
That's exactly the thing I want to ask you, because it's not about scaring them. Like we found that sometimes it's not about our question are scaring them. It's more about, why are you asking this? They actively resist the fact that you're asking questions from this. We did our bias check before, but still they have this perception that your questions are biased, are leading question. You want to use our answer to produce your own argument. And then, do you find that in your own research? And if you do, how do you deal with that? Thank you.
We'll go to Maksim.
I'll start with the last question because it strikes so close to home. I mentioned the low response rates that went even lower with the start of the war. Then they went up a little bit, but they have not reached the pre-war levels, which were not spectacularly high. And quite recently, I think like a couple of days ago, FTSIO, which is the state-owned Russian sociological service, published a paper on their site. It's open. You can download it on exactly this subject. The changes in response rates during the time of, they call it charmingly, Russia-Ukrainian conflict. Well, thanks to them for not calling it a special military operation or denazification. And I think you should, if you contact me, I'll send you the link. I think you should read it, translating it through Google Translate, which does wonders these days. So it is, actually, it's one of the examples why we can't ignore any source. Because imagine a state-owned agency actually doing a survey of this kind and publishing the results. And I've read the summary and I've seen their figures. What they show is, well, predictable. Response rates fell sharply down with the start of the war. And then even if the respondents agree to talk, once the conversation turns to questions about special military operation, they are more likely to drop off. Why is that? So that's why you need science, to show you things you would never have imagined on your own. This idea that the pollsters actually want something from you is quite familiar to us. Traditionally, there are two ways of reacting to being polled on the part of Russians. Either its authorities finding out whether you behave. So you ought to give all the right answers to show that you are the right, loyal citizen. And that is the safe thing to do. Another option is to consider this as an opportunity to complain. Because these guys, the pollsters, they will carry the information up there. And then the guys up there will know what your problem is. So this is the, again, rather traditional in every sense of the term way of dealing with being asked questions. The spiral of silence is a universal mechanism. It's everybody's thing. People want to give the right answer. They think what the right answer is. So they ask me, what am I thinking? What am I thinking? I'm thinking what everybody is thinking. And what is everybody thinking on the subject? Perhaps it's this last thing I heard on TV. So let's repeat it. That's the safe option. And the next one is repeating after the previous one. This is why the spiral of silence is the spiral, because it's going wider and wider. So we have this problem overall. Actually, even free societies have it. We humans are social creatures. We want to look good in the eyes of our fellow humans. So we are not so much concerned with giving the answer that is demanded as we are more interested in appearing right, knowledgeable, I don't know, socially adept in the eyes of those who question us. So we all have this same problem, but in a non-free environment, of course, it's getting much more pronounced. So the stages of public opinion. That's a question for a nice little lecture, because we've been at this war thing now for almost 3 years, and there's been several episodes and epochs and turns and twists of this public opinion dynamic. There was the initial shock. There was the quickly following adaptation and a bit of euphoria that has reached its highest level in late spring, early summer of 2022, when people understood that although the war happened, it's nothing very horrible. Their life hasn't changed much. The economic collapse has not happened. The banks are working. Their cards are functional. There are goods on the shelves. And the borders are not closed, no one is bombing them, so nothing to be scared about. So there was this euphoric period. In late summer, there has begun, again, we're talking about 2022, there has begun to be asked this main question, which is still the main question about the war on the part of the loyalists. Why is it taking so long? So people were wondering, if we are doing so great, as TV tells us, and we are actually feeling that our life is going on as normal, then why is it not over yet? Why hasn't we won? Also, at that moment, middle to late summer 2022, an important divergence happened in the Russian public opinion and, I would say, public life. This divergence was the new, I would say, contradiction between the militarists and the loyalists. Before that, it was one and the same group. Pro-war and pro-Putin were the same people. We are supporting this because we are the loyal subjects. We approve the president did this thing, we don't quite understand it, but he knows best. By about August, there appeared a group of people who were strictly pro-war, but started to doubt the ability or the desire of Russian leadership to conduct this war properly, seriously, full scale. This is the Prigozhin-Strelkov ideological platform. This is when it began. And then happened September 2022 and mobilization. Mobilization was the greatest shock to Russian society. If you look at the anxiety rates that I have mentioned, you will see this anxiety rating going up over 70%. It was nothing like the beginning of the war. The beginning of the war, in comparison, didn't agitate the country that much. So September 21st was to the majority what February 24th was to the educated part of society and to the outside world. That was the scariest and the worst thing that happened during this whole war. So when this mobilization was wrapped up, and it was wrapped up rather quickly, the active phase started, lasted about 3 weeks, less than a month. Then public opinion went a little bit euphoric, which strikes me as a kind of neurotic reaction when you've been scared a lot, but not killed. Then you have this kind of elation, like you're watching a horror movie. Then the zombie has sprung on you, but hasn't bitten your head off, so you're happy. And then started a rather long period of adaptation, which lasted the whole of 2023. I must say that frontline events like the taking of Kherson or the leaving of Kherson leave Russian public opinion more or less indifferent. People don't care that much about it. The upsurges of anxiety were visible when something happened inside the country, especially something that broke up the customary routine. For example, when the May celebrations were not carried out the way they usually were, that troubled the people. Or when the president behaved weirdly during New Year and his customary New Yearly appearances did not materialize, and even the New Year address at midnight was against a different background. He was surrounded by soldiers in uniforms. That kind of made people anxious. But frontline events, not so much. Even Prigozhin amused rather than troubled the Russian public. Now we can say this in retrospect.
We're way over time, so Maksim, I'm going to ask Maksim to respond and to do so, and I apologize for asking you to self-censor, but just within a minute, please.
Okay.
The short answer about Google because they can. But yeah, really, the second operator, the second broadcaster is French company, Eutelsat, which has satellites broadcasting Russian state TV. And that's funny that this company still has relationships with Roscosmos and other special organizations which are operating these satellites from Russian side. But in this Eutelsat company, 1%, as far as I remember, is the owners of 1% of this company is French government. I mean, there is no any system pushing on such companies to do something in another way. And if we are talking with Google workers, which say something unofficial, they say you should remember that we have business there, we have somebody who is working there, and they have families there. So that's why you should understand why we are doing like that. I think it's rather strange answer.
With that, I'd like to thank you all for coming, and I'd very much like to thank Ekaterina Schulmann and Maksim Kurnikov.